Welcome back to the North Carolina State Council's Virtual Council. I'm your host. My name is Roger Green Jr., and I've been your host throughout this virtual experience. Thank you and welcome to day 3 of our council. We have had an amazing time these past 3 days, whether it's been in Bible class and prayer clinics and content shared from our auxiliaries, as well as our nightly speakers. Our music and sacred arts has done a phenomenal job throughout this council, and today we're going to take it up a little bit higher. And so I'm so excited to present to you our very first session for today. It is sponsored by our Christian Education Department, and we're so excited about the phenomenal job that they've done. They typically have a slogan that says everybody ought to go to Sunday school. Listen, that's the foundation of our learning through Christian education, whether it's Sunday school or Bible class. That's how we learn and grow and begin to cultivate our skills and know our assignment as it relates to Christian leadership and just Christian growth. Today, I'm so excited because we have a few special things for you with Christian Education Department, one of which I'm going to teach on a class called Transgenerational Leadership. It's going to talk a little bit about bridging the gap between each generation, whether it's the baby boomers or the Gen Xers or the Millennials, and so on and so forth. And we're going to learn about certain ways to evangelize using these groups and learn how to lead these various groups and how not to leave anyone behind. And so I'm very, very excited about that. And we have a few other featured guests that will pop in and just join us here at the North Carolina State Council as well during this programming. But before we get started, I want you to share this message because sharing is caring. I want everyone on your timeline to be able to see this content and be blessed by the North Carolina State Council. And so until then, I'll come back with a short word later, but I want you to enjoy this programming as we go into the programming for the North Carolina State Council Christian Education Department.
All
Talk about generational leadership. Often we throw out terms and we have catchphrases. Some of them mean something, some of them don't mean anything. And so I appreciate the leaders choosing this topic because it is very weighty when we talk about transgenerational leadership. Let's take that prefix trans for a moment. Trans means to go across, to go beyond, to go through. To take something to the other side, to cross over, to pass through, to overcome. And when we have that prefix trans, one of the biggest words that I think about is transfer. Transfer means to bear across, to carry over, to bring through. And so when we talk about transgenerational leadership, we can't have transgenerational leadership if we don't carry something across, if we don't take something over, if we don't bring something through. And that's what I think the importance of this lesson is to talk about. How can one generation take it to the next generation and the next generation take it to the next generation and to pass it forward? When I think about our culture, much of our history had a great deal to do with transgenerational leadership. As emerging from where we came from in the motherland and moving on in this country where we were brought to on ships and on boats and dispersed throughout this country and really dispersed throughout the world through the transatlantic slave trade. Much of our culture was passed down, some of it orally, some of it written, was passed down from a transgenerational mindset that our ancestors made sure that our history was distributed from one generation to the next. And so much of it, even when we look at it in this dynamic of the church, we call it often in this culture, the Black church, not saying that to be racist, but saying it in the constructs of our subculture of how our leadership transferred different tenets, transferred different history over the years. We understand that it was a major importance to pass it along. Now, I ran track in the early part of my years up until college. In fact, I went on to go to a track school at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte to run track. And one of my favorite races was the 4x1 relay. I was a sprinter by nature. I was used to doing things fast, and I have to catch myself now because I live my life somewhat like that as a sprinter. And I have to understand that it is sometimes taking things slowly, systematically, day by day. In fact, that's why I wrote my book, The Journey of Living Day by Day. I understood it was more like a journey and less like a sprint, but I digress. And so when I ran, I understood in this relay, the 4x1 relay, it's called 4x1 relay because you have 4 participants that run 100 meters. And one time around the track is 400 meters. So when you split those 400 meters up in 4 parts, each person has 100 meters of the race to go. And so what I learned is that I didn't have the responsibility of the whole race on me, that I had partners. I had people to help me get to one state to the next, that each of us had our own responsibility. Each of us had our own role. Each of us had our own mini race within the race to run. And in some ways, the church is like that 4x100 relay. You don't have to have the whole church in mind and the whole existence of the church in mind on your watch. You just have a portion of it to run. And when you run your race, when it's over, it's over. And when you start it, you start. And so what I learned by that is in the baton exchange, it was a responsibility on both the one that passed the baton and one that received the baton. And so often if the baton was dropped, our coach would not only get on the one that was receiving the baton, but the one that was giving the baton, because he would say, yeah, the person that received it dropped it, but it was up to the one that was handing it off to make sure that it was handed off securely. And so I say often in the church, we look at it and we look at the ones that are to receive it and we think that they're not fit and they're not worthy. And we say, if it's dropped, it's their fault, when possibly it is twofold. It's the fault of the one that gave it to them. And so I say that in this race, as we talk about transgenerational leadership, there has to be a passing. It has to be a carrying on. It has to be bringing through something. And so we need each generation to do that. And so what we're going to do today, we're going to talk in terms of four major components of transgenerational leadership. Number one, we're going to identify the generations. Number two, we're going to talk about how to reach the masses. Number three, we're going to talk about the dangers of losing touch. And number four, we're going to talk about strategies of engaging. Those are the four areas that we're going to talk about: identifying the generations, how to reach the masses, the dangers of losing touch, and four, strategies for engaging. So when we talk about this and we talk about these forms of leadership, number one, we're going to start about identifying the generation. This is going to be a very comprehensive step. I'm going to try to get through it relatively quickly because I don't want to bore you with the minutia of these four generations, but it is very practical before we get to the next stages of this class or this course for you to understand these four. This is the base. This is the substratum, if you will, from whence we'll build upon everything that we'll talk about today. It is very, very important because if you do not understand these four groups, if you do not understand this foundation, you'll be lost and you'll never be able to engage. You'll always be out of touch and you'll never be able to reach those masses. All right, let's talk about these four, shall we? These four generations. And I could argue that it's really five generations that we see in our culture now, but the fifth we'll talk about lastly. This fifth generation, we don't even have enough anecdotal information. It's that current generation that has just emerged that many call the nexters that we'll talk about, that we don't even really have enough information to accurately talk about them, but we'll skim over that a little bit. These four generations you'll see on your screen. Number one, the traditionalists. Number two, the baby boomers. Number three, Gen Xers. And number four, the millennials. I'll say that again: traditionalists, baby boomers, Gen X, and millennials. Each of these generations are vital and are important, and they typically have some major events that happen in their lifetime that form and shape their thinking and why they do certain things. And so let's start with the traditionalists. This is the group of people that lived during the Great Depression, lived during World War II. They typically lived in rural environments, so they were very hardworking. They were used to waking up at the crack of dawn and working physically to get things done. And this is what we call the radio generation. This is one of the major forms of mass communication in their day. And this group was a very, very hardworking group. As I mentioned, because they grew up during the Great Depression, they learned to be very cautious, very thrifty. They were focused on saving money. I guess so. If you go through the Great Depression and the stock market crash and you lose every bit of money that you have in your savings, and you lose because the banks lost your money and your money wasn't insured and you lost that, that's why we see that generation be very thrifty, because they don't know if it's going to happen again. They're the generation that say, yeah, you don't put everything in the bank. You put a little bit, under your bed. You put a little bit in the safe. Even our own old mothers and grandmas and nanas, they would save and tuck a little bit in their blouse. They would save a little money that you couldn't find, because this was the generation that lost it all. And because of that, they went through hard times. They went through times where they were rationing gas, they were rationing cereal, rationing peanut butter, you name it. They're rationing sugar. They had sugar stamps during those days. They learned how to be very cautious. They took less risk. They began to be very thrifty because they did not know if it was going to happen again. They didn't, even when God blessed them with abundance, they always kept it and made sure keeping it, as they would say, keeping it for the proverbial rainy day. And so this generation, because they went through that, because they went through wartime, because most of them, many of the men were in the military, they were very authoritative. They learned the chain of command. They learned in the military that, I follow orders. I go by what my senior leader say. They were indoctrinated in this, and they were big on respect. This generation, you had to shake their hand and look them in the eye in order for them to trust you. And most of the times, many of the contracts that were done in those days, they didn't even necessarily have it in writing. If I shook your hand, your word had to be your bond. And I believed that if you shook my hand, looked me in the eye, then that was true of them. And so for many of them in that generation, they wanted to shake your hand. They wanted to look you in the eye. They wanted to feel you next to them. And many times in contracts, if they shook your hand, they'd shake your hand. And that was better than putting it in writing because your word was your bond. And so that's how that generation moved and operated. And that's why they think the way that they do. They were a radio generation. So the voice meant everything. They could understand communication by the inflection of your voice. So you had to watch your tone with them. And for many of that generation, you have to watch your tone. You have to watch how you say things. You say certain things, who you think you're talking to. That's that generation because it was radio communication. The voice was really how they paid attention to communication. And so that was the traditionalists. And so let's move on. The next group are the baby boomers. Now you can imagine, after coming off the generation that was so engulfed in war, so engulfed in, stock market crash, when dad came home from the war, he had been away from mom for a couple years. He got to know mom again in the biblical sense. Those of you that can read between the lines, he got to know mama in the biblical sense. And first came love, then came marriage, and then came mama with the baby carriage. And so you had a baby boom after all of that. And that's where the baby boomers came from. And these baby boomers were a little different than the traditionalists. These baby boomers, they were a group that grew to put value on affluence. Because imagine their parents struggled all this time in the war, struggled all this time in the Great Depression. So when the baby boomers grew up, in their mind, they said, I'm going to work hard so I never have to struggle again. I'm going to work hard so I ain't got to live like my parents had to live. I'm going to educate myself so that I'll have something to offer and I'll be able to get to a better job, a better way of life. I'll be able to live in a better community. So their mindset was really into being affluent. And within that group, you begin to see them grow and begin to want to have bigger houses, bigger cars, live in better neighborhoods. They wanted to be a part of the perceived middle class, which, as we go on now, hindsight being 2020, we realized that really was a setup, that the middle class really was designed against us than for us. But I digress from that point. And so they were the television generation. They went from just hearing people audibly to seeing them visually. And because of that, that gained more traction in us being more consumers. They wanted to buy the bigger houses, buy the bigger cars, get the bigger steak because they now saw it being advertised visually on TV. And because of that phenomenon, we begin to have to fight through prevailing stereotypes because in the first instance of television we see within our color, we see that we had terrible stereotypes of us. We had the blackface. We had different minstrel shows. We had the stereotypes of the nanny, the mammy, and the brutal buck, and the Uncle Tom, and the mulatto. And we had these pervasive stereotypes that whenever they showed black folk on TV, that's all they showed is us being a mammy, going with the wind, seeing us shucking and jiving and dancing in minstrel shows. And so culturally, that really changed and caused us to want to change our perception of how the world saw us culturally as African Americans. We wanted to be different. And so this baby boomer generation fought really, really for affirmative action. They fought for these different things. And so they were really, really big on respecting us as people. And when we see it even in the black church, we see because their desire to be affluent, we put on the best dressed suits. We drove the best cars. We made sure that those things were clean on Sunday. And we went to church, and that was the emergence of us really caring about how we looked in church and the big church hats and the big suit and tie to every service. That generation really cared about it because perhaps our parents didn't get a chance to do that. Our parents didn't care about their clothes as much because they couldn't. They didn't have the resources. But this generation cared about it. And that's why you'll see baby boomers cared about it in church. Listen, when you get in the pulpit, you wear a suit and tie. When you get in the pulpit, you look a certain way. Why? because we had to really, really pay attention to those things during that cultural era. And so that's how we understand, as we're Gen Xers and millennials, why they were so big on perception. It wasn't that they wanted to be fake. It was because that generation wanted to be a little different than their parents and be more polished and have more achievement than their parents, not because they looked down on their parents, but because they struggled a little bit with their parents to get to that point to where they was respected, and they were going through that civil rights movement to where we really wanted to change the perception of how we were viewed. All right. So the next group we're going to talk about is the Gen Xers. The Gen Xers are the group that learned a lot from the traditionalists as well as the baby boomers. The traditionalists were the radio generation. The baby boomers were the television generation. The Gen Xers became what we know as the computer or internet generation, even though we took a lot from the television generation. We were on the cusp between the boomers to where we started seeing things on television and things began to change right before our eyes. Even with certain sitcoms like The Cosby Show and A Different World, we begin to see the prevailing stereotypes change. The Cosby Show presenting a patriarchal father who was a doctor and the mother who was a strong attorney, and all the kids graduate from high school going to college. And then the spinoff of Different World showed us this view of this Black college experience. Listen, I wanted to go to college simply because of A Different World. And not only did I want to go to college, I even thought about going to a HBCU because they made the experience look so inviting for African-American people to be on an institution of higher learning, to matriculate in a sense to a point to where you could see affluent Black people of all places in life, coming from different walks of life, different places within the country, and be in a place that's safe where we can learn and grow and be just equally as superior to any other race. And so this Gen X group began to see things a little bit differently. Now, we said that the baby boomers were full of people that were having kids. So in that generation, had families that it was common to have, 5, 6, 7 kids, 8 kids. Well, when the baby boomers were born, they say, I ain't having all them kids like my parents. And so when they started having kids and brought in the Gen Xers, we saw that the family begin to get smaller. The family sizes begin to decrease. And because of that, Gen Xers make up the smallest group of people. And so you have traditionalists was a big group of people. You have baby boomers, a great large group of people. And then they begin to get smaller with the Gen Xers. And so the Gen Xers, we find that divorce was a commonplace within the Gen Xers. Unfortunately, we see a downward mobility, no lifetime job security with us Gen Xers. And so in the other generations, they would say, get you a job, stay on there for 40 years, retire. Well, corporations started to dissipate during Gen Xers, and you had a big tech revolution. So a lot of people would start losing their jobs. You didn't have as many coal jobs. I know that speaks to West Virginia. I know that you didn't have a lot of steel industry. That's people up in Pittsburgh and other urban places. And so because those jobs begin to decimate and begin to be replaced with tech jobs, the Gen Xers is the first generation that started to rethink being on the job for longevity. And because of the internet and access to the internet and technology, relationships begin to divest in ways that we had never really seen them divest before. This is the generation that we saw the consumer age. We saw parental involvement begin to decimate because there was technology everywhere. And because of it, even now, we see our cell phones are prominent. Our tablets are prominent in areas that have replaced sometimes some of the engagement that we were used to in some of the other generations. And that gave way to what we have in the generation now, this millennial group. This millennial group we find is a group that is different from, on the other end of the spectrum, the traditionalists. The traditionalists were very respect driven, and they said, don't ask why, just do it because I said so. Millennials ask why, and they ask why not out of disrespect, but out of respect. You have to take for a moment and think of this. Consider this. They were born in the information age. Information is at their fingertips. Knowledge, information is thrust upon them It's easily accessible. So they know why if they just want to know. They can type it in and find out why at their fingertips. So when they ask you why, it's typically not out of disrespect, it's typically out of respect. I'm not asking Google, I'm asking you why, because number one, you've shown yourself to be credible. Number two, I respect you. And number three, I value your opinion better than Google. And so I'd say to the traditionalists, I say to the baby boomer, I say to the Gen X, when the millennials or the nexters ask why, it's one of the greatest forms of respect that they can ever possibly confer to you, because I can just go ask Google. I don't have to ask you anything. So when I ask you, it means that I trust you, I value, and I respect you. And so when we understand the differences between these groups, we don't take things as disrespect sometimes. We understand that there are differences, but these differences can help us and enhance. Listen, the other generations could gain from the traditionalist view on being frugal, being cautious, being ones that value and are resourceful and not wasteful. Some of those generations can look at those things and gain from it. One of the biggest things that the enemy wants to do is he wants to put a wedge between the wisdom and the strength. He wants to put a wedge between wisdom and strength, because this is what happens. We don't get anything accomplished when wisdom fights against strength, because this is the thing. Wisdom don't have the strength to do the things that's in their mind, and the strength don't have the mind to do the things that's in their will. And what that does is it keeps us where nothing gets done around here. Nothing gets done the way that God intends for it to do. Because listen, the wisdom know the way, but the strength have the ability to get there. And so when we mesh together and the strength listens to the wisdom and the wisdom also listens to the strength, we can get some great things together. All right, North Carolina State Council family, I'm so excited to be here with you this morning. I told you that we have a treat today. Someone all the way from the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World headquarters. We know her as our marketing and media director for the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World, as well as the editor-in-chief of the Christian Outlook magazine. She is a media maven, but she is an evangelist as well. If you're churchy, we'll call her Evangelist Neechy Dumas. But if you know her in the secular world or business world or social media world, you probably know her as Neechy. And so you know you're a bad somebody when you're going by just one name. And so now, without further ado, let me bring my sister in, Evangelist Neechy Dumas, better known as Neechy. Let's give her a North Carolina State Council welcome. I want y'all to go crazy in the comments.
Well, I appreciate that, and I am so humbled and so grateful to be able to hang out with you, my brother. Always a
Absolutely.
pleasure on camera. So I'm grateful for this opportunity. And hello.
Absolutely. So we're so grateful to have Neechy. Neechy is one of the most sought after personalities in the media sphere, as well as in the church world, business world. She's just been recently featured even on the platform StreamYard. They asked her to come and give her input because she's been doing so much and so many great things since the pandemic. And so I'm grateful that she took out the time to be with us, because she is super busy. If you can notice in the background, that's the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World headquarters. Tell us a little bit about where you are, Neechy.
Well, this is pretty cool because I appreciate, Roger, that you even allowed us to be live from here, because behind me is actually, we are in the process of shipping Sunday school books for the upcoming season. So what you see behind me is the Sunday school books. We prep them, we get them ready so they can go out the door, so that when your orders come in, we can send them out. So that's what's behind me. So I'm actually in the shipping room, and there are other books along the left and the right of me. Your Christian outlooks are going out from this space. So I am in the Department of Publications at the PAW headquarters in the shipping area. And this is where all of our DOP employees hang out. You might see some of them pass by today. Mary is here, Mona's here, Stacy's here. You might see some of them pass through and maybe say hello, or in the background somewhere, something like that.
So for all of those that are not aware, the publications department, it's not just a one-stop shop. It's not just somebody just printing out on a inkjet printer. This
That's
is a
right.
full publication with a lot of subscribers, with what close to how many? Almost 100 years worth of publication. Tell us a little bit
Yes.
about the Christian
Yes.
Outlook.
I mean, you have the Outlook that goes back several years. You have the Sunday school books. We have, there's a book that we're getting ready to promote. It's the 100th year anniversary book. And so there are tons of publications. I mean, this is a consistent, everyday thing. This department does not shut down. Even during the pandemic, Roger, we were the one department that stayed open because
Right.
that Outlook was a necessity. The Sunday school books were a necessity. So it is definitely not a one-stop shop. It definitely is something that is continuous throughout every day.
We have such a rich history with the Christian Outlook, with Christian education material, but not just because you're here with me today. I want to applaud you and your staff, as well as Bishop Brooks and his staff who commissioned all of this. You all did a stand-up job during the pandemic. In fact, I believe that this is probably the best that the Christian Outlook has been since I've known, and I go way, way, way back in the Pentecostal Assemblies of the world, a pew baby, and I've
Wow.
seen issue after issue, editor after editor, designers after designer. I think that you have kind of curated some of the best and brightest minds as far as writers, as far as designers, as far as editing. I just want to applaud you on the great job that you're doing.
I'm certainly humbled by that, and certainly grateful to our presider, Bishop Theodore L. Brooks Sr., who so amazingly allows me to serve in this capacity. When I came into this space, it was important for me to look at things from a Christian outlook. And that is from, I mean, we are, several layers. We all have several layers. And so it was important to share what the Christian outlook is on health, on medicine, on business, on technology, on everything that's happening. That was important to me, and so we have an amazing team, amazing group of designers. DeMarcus Williams, I believe he is in your council. Okay,
Yes, he
DeMarcus.
is.
Okay, whoop whoop. Okay,
He's our young people's president.
yes, your young people's president. He's creative director on the Outlook. Then Mona Green, who has been here, who holds everything down for us. She is so amazing. You all may not see her on camera, but we cannot do this without her. And then also we have Stacy Munger, who does a lot of our shipping, and we also have Mary, who is our store manager. So when you get those emails and things, and you have a question about your order, Mary is usually sending them. Actually, Roger, in this issue, this is the November issue of the Outlook that's getting ready to go out. And these are the people that I just mentioned. Do you see, wait, where am I pointing? DeMarcus is there. Our other designer is Gabrielle. She's here. Mona,
Gabby.
you see Mona here.
Her last name Green, so she's special.
Right. Mona's last name is Green, so I think Mona got a lot of money. And then and then Dawn, she is Bishop Gator's daughter. And then Eric, who is in this issue, he was with us last year, but he is on hiatus from designing this year. But this is the December issue that's actually shipping out right now. And all of those designers and all the staff, actually all the PAW staff and everything is featured in this issue. So we have an amazing team, and no one is the island, and we all come together collectively. It's a unique space to work in because you're working in a creative space, which means, like you mentioned, as far as the pandemic was concerned, we were constantly changing or evolving or trying to make sure that we were meeting the need of the Christian outlook. At that time, we were experiencing many things during the pandemic last year. We didn't know when we were going to open, when we were going to close. If we just didn't know what was going to happen. So God really graced us last year and this year to put together something that we hope that everyone has enjoyed.
All right, let's move on to section 2. Section 2 is how to reach the masses. Listen, there's no real one way to do this, but I just want to drop out some key points that can hopefully help you reach the masses. When we talk about masses, we talk about mass communication. And when we talk about that, we say that each generation has their form of communication that was pervasive. We said traditionalists, it was radio. We said that baby boomers, it was television. We said from Gen X to millennials, it was television to internet. And from the internet down to devices, whether it's smartphones, smart TVs, tablets, you name it. These devices begin to be the trend on how you reach the masses. The problem that I've seen within the church circuit, problems that I've seen within the church culture is we're always too late to the trend. We're too late on mass communication. Remember, if you take your mind back, those of us that have been around for a while, every time there's a shift in mass communication, we first attack it and say it's of the devil. And because of it, we miss out, and we typically get behind the curve. And when we finally figure it out, it's about to shift again. What am I trying to say? We, back in the traditionalist age, when the radio came out, the church said, that's of the devil. Somebody talking to you out of some box. That's of the devil. God can't be into that. And then finally, when the church got to that, we started having radio ministries, but the rest of the world was on TV. And so we were missing out on that. And so then we attack the TV and say, that's just the devil. You being able to see stuff on TV, that's just a way for the devil to bring some stuff into your household. And the Bible told us that, we have to watch what we see. Yeah, that's true. We have to watch what we see. But by the time we caught on the TV and we started getting on the TV and we had TV broadcasts, the world was no longer on TV. They were on the internet. And then we say, no, you can't get on that internet because there's some mess on that internet, on that social media, and you can see pornography and all that stuff on that. And we attacked that until the pandemic happened. And then the pandemic happened, our church doors were closed, and we tried to jump on the internet and be on Facebook and some of these social media sites. And so my point is saying that the church always attacks the form of mass communication before we get on it, and we're typically 10 steps behind the rest of the world before we get on it. And so I submit to you that before you attack it, you must understand that every form of mass communication can be used for good and can be used for bad. But it's useful for us, and we should find it to be useful for us in propagating the gospel and reaching the masses. So number one, stop attacking the form of mass communication and find a way to use it to benefit us. All right. And so that's the first thing. There's 3 points that I think there are leadership imperatives for reaching the masses. These are 3 points I want to jump through really quickly. Number one, you got to be visible. Number two, you got to be vulnerable. Number three, you have to be virtual. I'll say that again. Visible, vulnerable, and virtual. Visible deals with what people observe from you. Vulnerable is what people feel from you. Virtual, where people connect with you. These are important because, number one, you have to be visible. We used to be in a very modest, very humble, very meek posture. In a lot of ways, I think some of it was genuine, some of it was faux humility. Some of it, folk were just trying to be pious and humble and meek, and they really weren't. I knew a lot of people that acted that way. That was some of the most arrogant, prideful people on the planet right there in the church. And so some of it really wasn't humility, it was faux humility. But in this generation, you have to be visible. You have to no longer hide and conceal what you do for the community. People want to see that because they equate invisibility with you being out of touch and you not connecting with the generation. And so every church leader, every leader has to be at a place and a posture to be visible. People need to see what you're doing. They need to see your presence within the community. I'm not telling you to be a politician or to be too political, but you should know some political people and politicians within your city. They should be able to get counsel from you. That's even biblical. You have people like Daniel who consulted to kings and to people, and he did this in the midst of being in the captivity. So how much more can we do it, and should we do it now, having the perceived freedom in this country? You should be in their ear telling them what they should do from a moral and ethical standpoint within the community, how to give to the poor. The world and the politicians shouldn't be the ones who have the inside track on how to feed the poor. That's what we're supposed to do. The gospel instructs us to do these things. The gospel instructs us to be to specialize in these particular aspects. So they can do all the grimy stuff from a political standpoint, but when it comes to policy of the poor, that should be the church's agenda. So you have to be visible. Number two, you have to be vulnerable. People don't want this high and mighty leader that really has no feelings and no emotions. And I've seen that so much in the church sector, to where people are sitting up on their throne with their staff and their royal scepter, and they're waiting to just tap people on their shoulder with their scepter and have people serve them and be up under them. And we look at those that serve under us as our little peasants and our underlings. Listen, that's not going to fly in this generation. They want a leader that's vulnerable. I don't want some high and mighty leader that don't know what I'm going through. I need someone that can be touched by the feelings of my infirmity. I want a priest that knows how it feels to struggle, knows how it feels to be heartbroken, knows how it feels to want to give up sometimes, knows how it feels to just be having insane thoughts going through your mind. I want to see your vulnerability. You don't have to be so transparent that you tell them everything that you did in your past, all your worst and deepest, darkest secrets, but they need to know that they can count on you to be vulnerable. And for you not to be so condescending, not to be so rigid that you can't understand when they mess up or have mistakes or feel certain types of ways. So they need a certain degree of vulnerability from their leader. Number 3, you have to be virtual. If you're one of those leaders that say, I don't want to be on social media, I don't want to get on the internet, I don't want to do that. Listen, you're probably not growing right now. If you're not virtual, you're not growing, especially through this pandemic. I'm not just saying that pie in the sky because people are not going to the yellow pages. They're not going to the newspaper. They're not looking at billboards to find leaders in church homes to go to. It's virtual. So if you don't know how to do it, you need to align yourself with some people that can help you get to that point and to do it. My father's 72 years old, and right now he's on every social media platform that is feasible. He does a weekly Zoom call called Testimony Tuesday with the entire congregation. He does some counseling via Zoom and video call, different things of that nature, because he realizes in this day and age, you have to be virtual. People have to find a way to connect with you, especially during a pandemic where they can't necessarily connect with you face to face. So you have to be visible, vulnerable, and virtual. Neechy, just as an observation, could you hold up the cover of that again? One thing I think that you have done so interestingly is you've bridged the gap between generations.
Wow.
And to see my young brother, Pastor
Yeah.
Tyson's on the cover, he and his wife Desiree,
Right.
that's something that would have been perhaps unheard of 50 years ago. And
And
so I've seen just kind of the variety over the years. Yeah, that's beautiful, beautiful family. And so it speaks to the longevity of the organization. Number one, going back to Bishop Tyson, to Suffragan Bishop Sean Tyson, to Jamie Tyson and his family. It speaks of the generational type of effect of the Pentecostal Assemblies of the world, but it also speaks of how broad the demographic is. And I think you've kind of caught magic in a bottle in a generation where publications are dying off. The
yeah.
Christian education of the Christian Outlook seems to be thriving. Can you speak to that, where we see other publications are having to pack up, they're dying. The advent of the internet and blogs have kind of put print out of business, but the Christian Outlook seems to still be thriving.
You know, what's interesting is when I came on board, Roger, is that everyone wanted a digital version of the Christian Outlook. I too wanted a digital version of the Christian Outlook. And so, we went through the necessary means to make something digital. So we've been digital since March of last year. A digital option has been available. But can I tell you that this is still top? This is still what everyone wants. We thought that that people wanted the digital, and I think that we probably all thought that we wanted that. But the thing that I believe that most people love about the Christian Outlook, as far as having it in paper edition, and also what I love is what you mentioned as far as being able to showcase and share what history looks like year after year, to be able to sit down and show this book to your grandchildren, your loved ones, flip through it and see the former presiders, the former bishops. This is a book that people keep on their coffee tables. They keep them, they carry them with them in their bags. They take them to work. They show people. We have pastors. We have an amazing list of leaders here that you all see in the front of this book. These are all leaders who actually order extra books. All these leaders here order extra books, and they share them with the sick and shut in, those who are incarcerated, with those who can't make it to church as often, especially during this pandemic. And so this is something that, I carry one of these. I carry the most recent copy around in my backpack at all times. So I think that is why, because it does have such rich history in it, It is a way to document where we are, where we're going, what we're doing. And I think that people really like having something in their hand. I know I do. And, I'm very tech savvy. I love technology. I love digital. But when it comes to the Christian Outlook, I want the paper edition. I want this edition. And so,
Absolutely.
so I believe that that's what's giving us our longevity, and then also showcasing the Christian Outlook. As you mentioned, the demographic of people that we have, some are very popular, some
Right.
the audience is just being introduced to today, and some they needed more information on. That's our Christian Outlook.
I think that's awesome because, as you mentioned, you don't have to necessarily be the great international speaker or the recording artist that everybody knows. It's given a broad outlook of everybody within the organization. And I think that that is so powerful. In fact, can you touch on, because we're talking to Christian educators, this is for our Christian education department, and many of them are writers, many of them are Bible teachers and scholars, theologians, and they might not even understand the fact that they could submit things to the Christian Outlook. They could possibly be a contributing writer. Can you speak to some of those opportunities that they may not be aware of?
Absolutely. So you all have an amazing ICEA president, Dr. Barbara Payne, who is just awesome and who has been kind to me during this transition and everything going on with the publications department as far as Sunday school is concerned. And so there have been some amazing writers. The Some of the staff members for the ICEA were featured in the September issue. And then we have Evangelist Brenda Bird from Messiah's Temple, who was featured in this November issue of the Outlook. So yes, absolutely. Those who are active, all of our writers need to be active members of a PAW church in good standing. I need to be able to call your leader if need be and say, is this person an active member of your church?
Let
And
the
they
church
say,
say amen.
and we need them to say yes. Okay. So, active member, you can submit an article, 600 words in a Word document. Don't do anything fancy with the document. 600 words, Word document. Don't put any logos, none of that. Just strictly a Word document. And then also a photo that should be in JPEG format or PNG format. That article should be 600 words. At the bottom of that article and within your 600 word count should be the about the author paragraph. You would say,
Paragraph.
paragraph. That means
That's
3 to
it.
4 lines. Okay. So an example would be, I'm Evangelist Neechy, marketing and publications director for the Pentecostal Assemblies of the world. I attend this church. This is my pastor, and this is how I serve in my local church. That is the about the author section. If you want to put that you've been married for however long and however many children, you could do that also. But Word document, only 600 words in total. No PDFs will be rejected. If you send it as a PDF, if it is sent to us already designed, it will be rejected. Word document only. And then the image, and you'll send that to the Christian Outlook at pawinc.org, the Christian Outlook at pawinc.org, and we will take a look at it. Roger, as you can imagine, we design the Outlook sometimes 3 to 6 months in advance. So if you send us something today, don't panic that we have not sent you a response back to say it's featured next week, because publications has to move pretty far in advance to make sure that things move as they need to. So we're usually 3 to 6 months in advance, and we have to take the time to go through those. I also meant to mention Dr. Ruth Tyson, who is just a dear heart. She also helps us with this whole process, and those articles that come in, she would also be looking at those. So that's what we need, and we'd love to hear new writers. Certainly, if you are in communication with Dr. Payne and you reach out to her, she can also send us the suggestion for writers. So you can also reach out to her, and she can make that suggestion to us also.
Let's talk about the dangers of losing touch. Losing touch is probably one of the single most important things that we can think of when we talk about leadership and transgenerational leadership. Because if you lose touch, you fall into the danger of not having anything to pass along. And so often we preach there's a great falling away of the church in in the last days, and a lot of times it's not a great falling away as it is much of a great pushing away of the church. And so we have people that leave our congregations, leave our ministries because we pushed them away, because we haven't been very strategic in how we keep in touch. Now, listen, this is what I've learned about staying in touch. Staying in touch does not necessarily mean you have to learn all the newest slang and lingo. Being in touch means that you have identified or assigned a great group of people around you, a team around you that is representative of every great generation within our culture. And so what that means is if you're a pastor that's in the traditionalist range, other core leaders within your church and congregation or organization can't just be of your age group. Because if you're looking to attract Gen Xers or Millennials or Nexters, they need to have some representation within themselves being presented within your congregation. Why is that so important? Because representation is very important. You like doing business with, you like connecting with people who look like you, people that you can relate to, and people that you can trust. And so the greatest way to have a heartbeat or a pulse on what's going on within those generations, you have to have a representation of those great groups in every aspect of leadership. Neechy, this council is our leadership conference council. And so the focus has been on leadership. And our theme has been relationship evangelism par excellence. And it basically deals with how we spread the gospel through relationships. And I want you to just talk briefly about your role as a leader, having to be able to draw from different other leaders and have different other relationships that you leverage to make sure that the work of the Pentecostal Assemblies of the world is done, because you're a busy, busy person. You're in the media, you have your own clothing line. Big shout out to Big Drip clothing line, which she's wearing right now. Some of the ladies at the convention you've seen with dresses and skirts and blouses, she has a slogan, Neechy made it. And so you have your hands in so many different things. The Pentecostal Assemblies of the world is not necessarily your full-time job. So as a leader, how do you go about bringing about other personalities, other people from all of the four corners of the earth, and being able to mesh them into a amalgamation of excellence? How do you do that?
I think, I was having a conversation with a dear sister where the people that she was leading, there was a lot of issues happening, and the team was like just really uncomfortable. And I shared with her, and this might sound a little churchy. This may sound a little churchy, but I shared with her that the oil drips from the top down. Okay, so okay, I mean, I'm serious. Whatever it is that you are putting out, that's what your team is going to be and the people that you connect with. And if there is a forest fire, then you as a leader have to be able to go in there in a certain kind of way and dissolve that and bring about unity. And so, as you mentioned, I'm in conversation with all different types of people from all different walks of life on a consistent basis. Secular world, design world, faith-based world, some who are lay members, some who are leaders. And so I think that you have to, for yourself, remove your pride, remove your sense of who you think you are, or whatever, and just talk to people how you would want to be spoken to. When I was producing for one of the biggest television networks around here, there were often times where I would be on camera, but then there were times where you would see me carrying somebody's bag, because today I am their assistant. And I did that with the same vigor and excitement as if I was on camera myself. And so it's important to me when I communicate with people, regardless of where they fit, that I'm speaking to them in a manner in which that I would want to be spoken to, respectfully, with kindness, with compassion. Um, Learning that it's okay to uplift other people, to talk about the good things about other people, to be excited about there's Mary. You guys, do you guys want Mary on camera?
Yeah, let's see Mary.
Mary, the people want to see Mary. We're gonna get Mary to come through. This is who you all deal with when you call up here about your order, is Mary, okay? But you have to be able to also not take things personally, because everybody has a different way in which they express their frustration about how something is not working, or the timeline that you have that they, can't work within, or that they don't understand how you're going to do something, or they're unsure. And especially if you're coming into an environment and you're new and you're making changes. And so you got to be able to communicate. You have to be able to set your pride down, build a healthy relationship, remove for me, I can't speak for everyone else, but for me, I don't have a title driven thought process. I'm just here to make sure that everything gets done.
All right, Neechy, last question. What would be your advice for Christian educators all over the world as it relates to engaging people into Christian material? Because obviously we need books, we need writings, we need things of that nature to kind of supplement what we teach. What would be your advice to those Christian educators?
One of the things that we hear people talk about all the time is, you know, bees and honey, and whether or not, if you how can you attract more, how can you attract more people, how can you attract more people? Is it to beat them over the head with something? Is it to you know force something down their throat? No, it's to build a relationship, like what you talked about before. It's us being aware of what's going on in our world, and in some kind of way trying to share that story and identify. When people realize that you can identify with what they're going through, or that you're sympathetic with something that they're going through, or that you have a listening ear, something like that, I think you can take what you are hearing, what they are sharing, and merge that with what it is that you're wanting to share and teach. And I think that if we share that in a way that is not hitting somebody over the head, but just sharing Christ just amazingly. Sometimes we are able to share Christ through our own story, and how I can't tell you how many times I've shared my story of something I experienced and talked about the goodness of God, the scriptures that carried me through, how the prayers carried me through. And the person I'm talking to is like, wow, they're hearing me differently, because I'm telling them the how God brought me through. I'm telling them why I leaned on God. I'm telling them what his promises were to me, and why I depended on his promises. And so I think that we can, life application. I'm always a fan of life application. That's what we try to put out in our outlook, is life application, some way to connect in. And I believe that, like you mentioned before, relationship, all those things are building relationships.
Well, Evangelist Neechy, I'm so glad that I've had a relationship with you as your brother in Christ. As you know, we can bounce
Absolutely.
ideas off of each other. You've opened up so many doors, even for me, and so I'm grateful and appreciative to everything that you've brought to my life. You've certainly added value, and we thank you here at the North Carolina State Council for just even taking the time to do this. We don't count it lightly. We don't think that it's just Neechy will do it. We really appreciate it, because you're obviously working there at the headquarters, but you took the time to be with us. And so we love you for it, and we appreciate you.
Well, I'm certainly grateful, Roger, and humbled and appreciative to have gotten the call, to be a part of this. And I am going to try to get Mary on camera for y'all at some point. Maybe it'll air after this, but at some point, I'm going to try to get some of the staff on camera and share that with you all. Thank you so much. And I love you all. God bless.
No doubt. Before we close out, Neechy, let's just send a good shout out to who I like to call Aunt Betty. She's our
Yes.
superintendent for Christian
Yes.
education. And so, Sister Betty Thomas, if you're watching, we're wishing you a speedy recovery. She's just recovering from a surgery, and we just want to let you know that we're praying for you. We love you. I brought Neechy all the way from Indianapolis, Indiana, just to tell you that we're praying for you and that we love you.
Absolutely. When she called me to ask me to be a part of this, she was just such a beautiful heart and just a beautiful soul. It's a pleasure to speak with her. Certainly, we here are praying with and for you, and believe in God to send speedy recovery as well.
Absolutely. Well, that's going to do it for this segment. North Carolina State Council's Christian Education Department. We love you. We appreciate everything that you're doing. To all the teachers out there, to all the superintendents out there, to all the expositors of the Word of God, we applaud you for your effort. We love you. Keep doing what you're doing. And from Indianapolis, Indiana, with Neechy, all the way from Charlotte, North Carolina, where I am currently, we wish you a happy, happy day.